been a huge day for the Maple Leafs as they get top prospect Matthew Knies under contract. We've also got some other top prospect signings from around the league, including a big signing in Minnesota and Los Angeles, as well as Washington. We also have some news on a Flyers prospect that's not going to be signed, and some very interesting comments from a few players who are around the NHL, including Bo Horvat and Chris Wideman in Montreal. We'll discuss all of that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news to talk about today. Today's video is mostly going to be focused on prospects and some big signings here by NHL clubs. Of course, we saw the National Championship and the NCAA college hockey scene wrap up last night. It was looking like Minnesota might be able to hang on and win, but Quinn Piniak ended up with a late power play, tied the game and won 10 seconds into overtime. Looked like it was a set play there to become national champions. After last night's dramatic win, obviously today's involved a lot of chatter around players taking the next step, taking to the jump to the NHL for those that are ready to do so. And the big one being the Toronto Maple Leafs and Matthew Knies getting a lot of attention. And that deal in the past hour here or so has become officially official. So after a long debate in the last 2 years when Matthew Knies was going to join the Leafs, it's now officially on the books. It was obviously some concerns as well recently on how they'd have to structure the deal, or would they be able to get him signed due to their really tight salary cap situation. But certainly Brandon Pridham in Toronto has done a fantastic job working with Kyle Dubas to be able to manipulate that to the best of their abilities to squeeze everything they possibly can in under the cap. So he gets the max rookie salary, max signing bonus, but there's no performance bonuses. That was a big concern. Of course, like I said, was the Elliot Friedman reporting on the weekend that Matthew Knies, if he really wanted to push for performance bonuses, that might delay the signing. It might not be able to be something the Leafs could be able to do here in short order, but they were able to figure it out, and he agreed to the contract without those extra performance bonuses built in. Now, he will burn a year off the contract regardless if he appears in any games down the stretch here for the Maple Leafs or not. Just the fact that the contract is registered and he's on the roster is enough to do so. So it's a 3-year ELC, but essentially will play for the next 2 years, and then will be at RFA. Now, of course, because he signed this contract with the Leafs after the trade deadline, he is not AHL eligible. So what they can do in some cases like this is, instead of signing NHL contracts, players can sign an American Hockey League contract or tryout and go down and play for the AHL team in that way, but they can't go on and sign the NHL contract and then be eligible to go to the American Hockey League. So Matthew Knies will only stay with the big club. How much playing time he gets, it's difficult to say, but we will find out here as time goes on. But he looks like he's certainly more than NHL already. He's had a couple of big years of college hockey in Minnesota. Obviously one of the top players in the college hockey scene. He's got the size, his dress, 6'3", 210 pounds. This year he put up 21 goals and 21 assists for 42 points in the 40 games. And so obviously just came close to being a national champion last night, losing out in overtime. So certainly a really solid player, somebody who could be a terrific scoring winger for the Leafs, or at least that potential appears to be there. He has all the signs, all the attributes that they're looking for a successful transition. So obviously it's been a few years since he's been drafted. He's been playing against older college-age players, which is a good sign that the fact he's been not successful is a real positive sign here for the Maple Leafs. So obviously the Matt Murray situation with the injuries, what really complicated their cap, and whether or not this was going to be possible. And if Murray can't go in the next game to be able to at least back up Samsonov, they might have to go the route again of having another e-bug. Or they might be able to squeeze in, actually, I think under the regular rules, the way they'll be, I believe, because they used an e-bug in the last game, that they can go over the cap and actually bring up Joseph Wall on an emergency recall. I believe that should be something that they can actually do, so they shouldn't need to worry about that any further. Now, some other big signs around the league is regarding some other interesting prospects as well. The Minnesota Wild have signed their top D prospect, Brock Faber. Of course, part of that Minnesota team as well. He was a captain, top defenseman, 20 years old. He's born and raised in Minnesota, so of course one of those players has been fortunate to play in his home state through multiple levels here. So of course gets to go to Minnesota for college hockey, now part of the Wild organization. Of course, he was originally drafted though by the Los Angeles Kings. He was a pretty high pick of theirs, I believe, second round pick, but he was traded to the Minnesota Wild along with another pick, first-round pick, in exchange for Kevin Fiala this past offseason. So certainly it was kind of rumored that Faber may or may not sign with LA. Obviously, they have a lot of prospects there anyway. He probably would have wanted a little bit more of a guarantee, the direct path to get to the NHL. But didn't have to worry about that. He was traded to the Wild, where he's quite content, and I'm sure to be able to see a path here, especially with the cap situation in Minnesota. If he's able to step in and take a top 6 role immediately, starting next year, especially on a full-time basis, that will even be more helpful to Minnesota if he can do so. So another great prospect there under contract for Minnesota. And the Los Angeles Kings had signed Alex Laferiere. Now he, of course, was taken in the 3rd round of the 2020 draft. Of course, that was the year that Alexis Lafreniere was the first overall pick. And of course, the Kings picked number 2 was Byfield going number 2 that year. I know there was a lot of people joke that they couldn't get Lafreniere, so they went with Laferiere instead later on. Just a play on name there. But ultimately, he's a 2020 3rd-round pick, a solid scoring right winger, 6 feet tall, 175 pounds. So might need a little bit of muscle to be more successful in the NHL, but still pretty decent size. Went to Harvard University for the past few years. Had a real solid year this year. Put up 42 points in only 34 games. Now, as I mentioned with the AHL thing, it's the same sort of thing with Laferiere. Before signing this contract, though, he had previously signed an amateur trio contract with the Ontario Reign in the American Hockey League, but the LA Kings affiliate, and played 4 games there where he scored 1 goal. And then obviously after getting a few pro games under his belt, they were comfortable signing this ELC when the time was right. So obviously, another real solid, good-looking prospect there for Los Angeles as well. The Washington Capitals have signed goalie prospect Mitchell Gibson, 6'1", 175 goalie. He was drafted back in 2018. He was actually a 4th-round pick. You don't always see players drafted that long ago actually still sign with the team that drafted him. He's played the last 3 years for Harvard University. So obviously, he would have been a teammate of Laferiere's. He gets his ELC on the books here as well with Washington. In Boston today, of course, they're playing in Philadelphia. They're resting a ton of players, certainly going with the load management approach here. A bunch of call-ups, but they're sitting out Bergeron, Hall, McAvoy, Orlov, Krejci, and Allmark. Allmark didn't even make the trip. I'm not sure on the other players if they did, because they played yesterday at home and had to travel to Philly for a game tonight. So obviously, really, if I was the Bruins, I'd be doing the same thing. First place in the division's wrapped up. The President's Trophy's wrapped up. Why not take advantage and get your players some rest for the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs? Now, as I've reported as well, there's also a prospect here in Philly that's not going to get signed. His signing rates are coming due here shortly, but former first-rounder 2018 Jay O'Brien of the Philadelphia Flyers is not going to get signed by the Flyers. Elliot Friedman talked about this on the 32 Thoughts segment last night in the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, talking about the fact that the combination of things here, I'm not sure if it's entirely the team not wanting to sign him or it's a combination of the player not really wanting to sign either, but he's played the past 3 years at Boston University, hasn't been the most consistent, has battled a lot of injuries. He was, like I said, taking a pretty high pick. They actually had multiple first-rounders that year in 2018. And O'Brien, I think you could say at the time, was a little bit of a surprise pick. They certainly picked him higher than I think a lot of teams had him pegged on their draft list. And it's not looking like it's going to work out for a signing to take place with the Flyers organization. So given the fact that they're going into rebuild mode and they don't want to sign him, that's pretty telling in my opinion. I think it's just a player that's not trending well, and it doesn't make sense for them to see it's on a contract. So we'll see if he finds an opportunity with another NHL club. Now, as I mentioned last night as well, we also seen some interesting comments on multiple occasions. It's rare because usually when you hear hockey players doing their interviews, post-game, pre-game, whatever, they're usually pretty bland. A lot of cliche statements are made. And I know a lot of sometimes fans give them a hard time for that, wanting them to show more personality. It just kind of, say more things that be more honest. And they certainly, gave a couple of examples of that last night where they went off the cuff and kind of were talking more about how they felt and certainly were not giving the cliche answers. And I know they're getting a lot of different reactions around the NHL, starting with Bo Horvat, of course, the former Vancouver Canuck captain, now solid member of the New York Islanders, of course, was traded there before the deadline, signed a long-term deal. Of course, had a good start down, but it certainly cooled off production-wise. I don't know if it's fair to say that he hasn't played well, but certainly hasn't been putting up the numbers that he was in the beginning or even when he was in Vancouver earlier this season. But he was asked after the game, of course, to keep in mind, they had just won a huge game in their playoff push. They're on their home ice at UBS Arena, doing a post-game interview, of course, with the fans right there able to hear. And he was asked how this playoff push and excitement of the building and the fans' involvement right in his career. And his response was basically like a flying elbow off the top rope to the Vancouver Canuck fan base, saying, it was a lot better than Vancouver. I'll tell you that for free. And I think a lot of people were just shocked and jaws at the floor when he said that. I mean, certainly Horvat seemed to be, really loving his time in Vancouver. I don't know that he really wanted to leave. Obviously, I think the fans there can be quite good. I think the fans at any NHL fan base can be, quite supportive. And at the time when the players are playing there, certainly feel like that's one of the best in the league. But obviously, I think that's, for the most part, some Vancouver people are offended and hurt by this. And I think you got to keep a couple things in mind here. You got to remember, for one, just won a huge game in their playoff push. He's trying to get their fans hyped up for playoffs and for the big win. And, certainly a lot of players, a lot of times you hear interviews that will say things to get like a little cheap pop from the crowd. So I don't think that's really anything unusual. And I just don't really think that it's, I think it's, and I don't think it was meant to hurt Vancouver as it was much to hype up the Islander fans. But I'd be curious to see what you all think of the Bo Horvat comments. And it certainly seemed out of character for him to take a shot at anything to do with Vancouver in any capacity. Certainly not something you'd expect. And it's not something you really ever hardly hear from any NHL player, especially somebody that you would not expect in Horvat. Now, the other scenario last night was the Maple Leafs and the Habs. Of course, the Leafs, like I said earlier, had to have an emergency backup goaltender. They signed Jet Alexander from the University of Toronto. It was actually a pretty decent goalie at the lower levels for U Sports and other lower leagues that he's played in. So not like he's some scrub off the street. But certainly he was able to back up and sign an emergency or amateur tryout and back up Samsonov last night. And in the final minute or so of the game, the Leafs decided to put him in, get him his dream come true, and actually have a moment on NHL ice and to say he actually officially played an NHL game. Now, the other part of this, there's two parts of this that was weird. One, Sheldon Keefe was asked about this post-game, the Leafs head coach, and he said that it wasn't even his decision. And the word came down, he said, about 30 seconds before the whistle blew that they were going to put him in or should put him in. And then he was asked, well, who made that decision? And he said that it didn't matter. So I don't know if that came from Kyle Dubas or Brendan Shanahan or who it was. But at the end of the day, I don't even think it really matters. I wouldn't care if it was Keefe's decision. But just an interesting comment that it wasn't even his choice. At the end of the day, though, the Leafs had a huge lead. I believe it was around 1:10 or something like that was left on the clock. Ended up being a 7-1 Leaf victory. They put the guy in to achieve his dream. Now, I've seen some Hab fans not crazy about it. For the most part, I don't know if a lot of Hab fans agree with the Chris Wideman comments. And when Wideman was asked about it post-game, what he thought of them doing that, he said he wasn't fond of it and that they'll get what they deserve in a few weeks. Obviously, taking a shot at the Leafs, and I'm sure what he means is the fact that they've lost in the first round of the playoffs in the last number of years, and he expects it to happen again, is what I assume he's getting at here, without actually saying it. He's obviously assuming that the playoffs are not going to be a fun time for Toronto. They'll go down and they'll get what they deserve. To me, that's a complete disrespectful, completely stupid answer on Wideman. That shows him really being, I don't know how to describe it. It's just unnecessary and just completely dumb, in my opinion. I mean, really, you guys are the ones that couldn't handle them and were having a bad game and were losing so badly that they were comfortable putting in somebody with no experience to finish out the game because they knew there was no danger in them losing no matter what happened. So really, why not let this guy live out his dream and have his moment on the ice? He may never get that chance again. He was actually, it's the second time he's been able to be an E-Bug in the NHL. The first time, though, never got into the action. But Now, like, you know, he's got to say he appeared in an NHL game. Like, yes, it was not very long, and yes, it was rather uneventful, but it doesn't matter. That's, you know, we all, as hockey fans and former players and whatever, like, we all have dreams. And if I had a chance to get on the NHL ice, even if it was for 30 seconds, and I wouldn't care what people said, I'm taking it, because that's been a long dream of mine too, which I know is never going to happen. So why wouldn't you do that? It's just completely stupid of Chris Wideman to say that, in my opinion. I think it's completely uncalled for. But really, at the end of the day, I know some people agreed with him, but I think more fans, even Habs fans I've seen, disagreed with him myself more than I've seen the opposite. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are on Horvat and Wideman's comments. These are really not things you see very often, rather unusual. And of course, these big signings we saw with some of the top prospects like Knies and Faber and Laferiere entering the NHL here to get their careers underway. So let me know your thoughts on that. We'll talk about it more in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.